5 minutes ago, a horrifying emergency announcement echoed through the royal corridors. Princess Anne and Princes normally composed. Catherine arrived side by side to confirm that Meghan Markle is entirely to blame for this issue. But this was no ordinary controversy. It marked the start of a major royal emergency, from layers of dishonesty that had been quietly growing beneath the surface for months. Before we go any further, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any information about the royal family. It began with a brief, yet shocking glimpse outside Clarence's house. Cameras hurried to capture Princess Anne's moment as she stood behind Princess Catherine, who was obviously upset in her usual calm, yet dominating manner. Together, they addressed a group of reporters with the gravity typically associated with national emergencies. The tone was clipped. They have a purpose when they speak, but what wasn't said had a greater impact on the nation than what was. They talked about how royal integrity was being undermined and issued warnings of irreversible consequences. The implication was overwhelming, even though no names were mentioned. The internal, private issue was called Meghan Markle. Senior royals were reportedly tricked for months, or perhaps years, by information that now appears to be completely false. The entire extent of the fraud was not revealed, but the appearance in Anne's eyes, it said it all. This was no longer a result of family disputes. The legitimacy of the monarchy was directly threatened. The decision to make these comments was not made lightly, according to those close to the palace. In actuality, it was the outcome of an intense internal struggle that lasted all night. A few tools begged the royals to use cautious and to deal with the matter in secret, but Anne and Catherine had had enough. They believed that being mute had just facilitated the spread of false information. It was now necessary to inform the public that things had gone terribly wrong. Insiders claim that Meghan's purported distribution of a private document containing details about her organization to legal teams was the final straw. Contradicted the existing royal documents. When Anne and Catherine compared those claims, they found that once the boundary was passed, there was no turning back. Even the palace, meanwhile, is now keeping quiet about the extent of the findings. That was all made public, were ominous hints and opaque language. Not enough to give clarification, but enough to start speculation. It was a plan, without a doubt, a message informing Meghan that they were watching, documenting, and prepared to act. The public's response has been powerful and quick. Social media took off in a matter of minutes. Regarding the nature of the emergency, royal pundits are was it a fiction, a top-level betrayal, or a leak? Although nobody is certain, everyone is clear that this is just the beginning, because this press release wasn't like the others. The explosion was under control. One that made the monarchy shudder and the globe demand explanations. To understand how, now that the palace has reached this boiling point, we must return to the quiet disintegration that began behind closed doors weeks ago. The royal family has continuously remained mute in the face of controversy, but this time, quiet was out of the question. Keep them secure. The serious looks of Anne and Catherine conceal a secret truth. As manipulation gradually spread throughout the palace's ranks, Meghan's own network of division, uncertainty, and betrayal was left in its wake. It began gently. The public was distracted by lavish festivities and well-planned appearances, but Catherine noticed something unsettling. A few minor inconsistencies can be found deep inside royal records. A date, one signature here, one signature over there. At first, she thought it was an administrative error, but when she pulled at the loose thread, the cloth began to shatter. She discovered conflicting records directly related to Meghan's claims by cross-referencing private notes, schedules, and archives entries. Some of these materials had previously affected public opinion on royal occasions. As Catherine's research progressed, it became increasingly clear that this was not a coincidence. The important dates for private invites, royal engagements, and even financial disclosures had been significantly altered to Meghan's benefit. However, it wasn't just internal files. It appeared that Meghan was working covertly with a small number of outside advisors based on emails that were leaked, some of which were shared anonymously on encrypted chat sites. The UK. These letters painted a concerning picture of long-term influence in planning, despite their meticulous phrasing and frequent vagueness. Catherine went to Princess Anne, the only other royal known for her uncompromising devotion to duty, after realizing the implications. Unlike others, Anne didn't hesitate. Using handwritten notes, calendar access logs, and private correspondence, she began creating a secret timeline. Her concerns were swiftly dismissed, though, when she made a covert attempt to alert Camilla and King Charles. Charles reportedly called the incident a grave error, while Camilla reportedly suggested moderation, emphasizing optics over escalation, and pointing out that the decision would be costly. Anne and Catherine were compelled to labor in secret because the palace administration would not accept anything. Every week, new suspicions and inconsistencies surfaced. Rumors circulated about requests for special meetings with foreign leaders, Meghan's strategic placement at significant events, unapproved alterations to press releases, and appearances timed to contradict official royal messaging. The appearance of harmony began to disintegrate over time. Workers in the royal household started to pick sides. There was still a fatruta procedure, while others opted to remain silent out of fear or charm. Trust rapidly declined, but the public remained ignorant. Fed only a polished narrative was presented by the royal machine. But Catherine knew that there would be terrible repercussions if the monarchy was built on made-up Baileys. This no longer depended on family, it was about the crown. Itself. Anne and she both knew it was time to take action. The lies weren't only spoken. It is recorded, stamped, and sealed in regal history. As the strands of dishonesty grew increasingly visible, a dangerous hush fell to disintegrate within the inner circle, especially between William and Charles. Although Prince William's anger was silent, it was icy. According to palace insiders, the prince felt duped not only by Meghan but also by his own family's inaction. William issued a terrifying warning when it became evident how severe the lies were. The monarchy may not improve if this becomes public without our response. It had been building for weeks. William, the usually charming heir, had kept his concerns to himself. But when more contradictions emerged as a result of Catherine and Anne's actions, his patience ran out. As a result of his relentless investigation, he requested a comprehensive internal assessment, a sincere investigation, and access to staff interviews, event recordings, and private communications. Instead of seeking certainty, he sought clarification. Instead, he ran into resistance. Concerned by the images, Camilla reportedly warned that any formal inquiry may open a Pandora's box. Several senior advisors urged William to let it go, while adhering to the unity image. They contended that confronting Meghan would merely reinforce her account, that the public's memory would degrade, and that the reaction wasn't worth it. But William could see straight through it. This had nothing to do with drama. In his opinion, here both the truth and the future of the crown were in jeopardy. A private gathering in Sandringham was the turning point. There, in a tense royal parlor, William confronted his father. He presented the proof, the impact, and the timeline. But always cautious, Charles declined to make a big move. He feared scandal. He was afraid of division. He was more concerned about the potential emotional disaster. The argument was brief but awful. They said things to each other that they had never said before. William reportedly left the room without making much of a bow. Soon, later, a voicemail was leaked. William was heard talking to an anonymous confidant on muffled audio that was clearly not intended for public viewing. His voice cracked, with exhaustion. They knew, he stated. They saw the warning signs, but they did nothing. It was the voice of a future king who was deeply hurt, in addition to being enraged. Catherine's determination never faltered. While many asked, recognizing the prudence of escalating the situation, she stood behind her husband with unwavering clarity. She understood the cost of silence. Headlines, speculations, and disparaging comments about her character and family had already cost her dearly. She was tired of William doing everything all by himself. Inside the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace shifted. Advisors split up into groups. Some Williams fans seek transparency. Others demanded damage control and quiet. But no one could dispute it anymore. This was too much to bear. It was combustible. Nevertheless, Anne watched all the chaos in silence. As she gathered her belongings and made preparations for the future, she had already stolen her own steps. William was consumed by Anne's argument and was about to become enraged. Because sometimes you have to take the initiative instead of waiting for approval in order to defend the throne. However, Princess Anne was the one who took a step that turned whispers into fighting when it seemed like hostilities were at their peak. Anne, the palace's silent guardian, is rarely noticed. But this time, she did more than simply speak. She demanded something. In the midst of a pressing appointment wish, she gave King Charles a terrible threat in sealed evidence. If you don't, I'll do something. The monarchy's last line of discipline had just taken off the gloves. Anne had been watching for too long. She had watched in silence as Meghan's influence increased and her deception spread via press reports and royal documents. But neither emotion nor ego drove Anne. She was driven by duty. She also doesn't hesitate when faced with danger when performing her duties. Over the course of several weeks, she gathered the private letters, receipts, and other paperwork, altered timetables, fictitious guest lists, mistakes made internally, and manipulation of communications. All of the claims, some modest, others shockingly bold, pointed to the same fact. Meghan had altered the palace's narrative in order to achieve her personal goals. Anne's dossier was meticulous, almost surgical. Every document is corrupt, and each quote is supported by time-stamped documentation. Additionally, even though Catherine had an alias, the one who turned the parts into a weapon that was too sharp to ignore after uncovering the initial discrepancies, she didn't wait for approval. Anne marched straight inside, avoiding royal courtiers and private secretaries. King Charles's private study. No notice, no delay. As soon as she entered, she put the document on his desk and showed that the lies had gotten so bad that the institution itself was in danger. She would also go public whether Charles agreed or not if he did nothing to protect the family name. Camilla attempted to intervene, as she frequently did when conflicts emerged and the palace was in danger of erupting, but this time, her voice was helpless. The thunder was louder and more measured than it had been in decades at the palace. According to Anna, she reminded me of her lifetime service, her record of discipline, and her avoidance of drama. They had all waited too long for her to be moving forward. Anne was not only a personal threat, but also an institutional one. If Charles didn't act quickly to correct the record and handle the story, she vowed to retire from her public royal duties, asserting moral quandaries that could not be resolved. For a senior royal of Anne's caliber would upset the Commonwealth. The world would know that something had gone terribly wrong inside Buckingham Palace. Behind the scenes, Catherine remained silent. Cohesion. She provided Anne with secret remarks, private letters that had not yet been made public, and private cross-checks. Together, the two women became an unstoppable force. Ignore it while others mumbled about damage. Control. Anne and Catherine prepared for impact. It was a time of introspection for Charles' turn to face the flames immediately, or let the crown burn slowly from the inside. He would soon have the option. But fate had other plans, as was usual the case in the royal household, because just as Anne took her boldest stance, a second voice, quieter but no less forceful, emerged. Prepared to break the silence. But even Anne was unprepared for what would happen when Catherine took center stage and finally raised his voice. Every royal smile hides an unseen struggle, and Catherine had been fighting hers in silence. Catherine was at a turning point in her own life, but Anne only kept her job. Remain calm, or finally say up. Surprisingly, she decided to stick to the truth, even if it meant exposing her deepest wounds. From the outside, Catherine had always seemed serene. But the suffering was severe and continuous in private. There was more to it than the misinformation Meghan spread. It was the use of moms, families, and children as weapons. It was a breaking point in one particular case, which is still talked about in whispers among royal staff. At a sensitive moment when their children were making royal appearances, Meghan publicly implied that Catherine had undermined her. The story was largely accepted, ambiguous, and emotionally intense. But Catherine had the records to prove it wasn't true. Behind closed doors, she began secretly compiling staff memos, email threads, and eyewitness records. Testimony. She retained everything. But she never spoke to the public or altered the media's account. When Meghan's story was recounted by a well-known media outlet, Catherine's once gracious quiet turned into a burden. She changed at that very instant. Meghan's own circle allegedly shared an email that directly disputed her claims. Meghan appeared to mock Anne what Catherine had described as a very private occasion. The Princess of Wales was discussed using words so cold that it left senior aides was surprised. That's when Catherine broke. She didn't snap. She did not rush to the tabloids. Instead, she gathered her team and gave what would later be considered one of the most moving briefings in royal history. This family is safe because of me. That's what she said. But I won't allow my children to act as a shield for other people's goals. They trembled with conviction rather than fear in her normally serene and sympathetic tone. She didn't realize that what she was saying was being taped. A microphone accidentally recorded her in real time. Statement. Inside the royal gates. The video had a significant impact, even though it was never seen by the broader public. Concerning the intensity of her secret suffering and the bravery she had shown became apparent to those closest to her for the first time in hiding it. After then, she and Anne ceased to behave in unison. They were waiting in line. They share intelligence, tactics, and strategies. They agreed on a single objective: to protect the monarchy's dignity and the innocence of children too young to defend themselves. Retaliation had nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with reputations. It is related to reality. Catherine knew that her silence had cost her trust and caused her to have sleepless nights. But now, with an at her side and the proof in hand, she was ready to take on the storm. The court had no choice but to align with both Catherine and Anne. The lies could no longer be hidden. The countdown to exposure has begun. At an elevated fight took place in Grove House, away from the chaos and cameras. Tension between Catherine and the royal legal council was evident during a private discussion between Meghan and Anne. A reunion turned into a reckoning. The invitation was purposefully written to seem objective. Diplomacy, masquerading as peacekeeping. Meghan was told that she will have an opportunity to clarify during the meeting misunderstandings. She had no idea that Anne and Catherine did not want to permit. The situation devolves into courteous formality. Clearing the air wasn't the goal here. It had to do with drawing a line. As always, Anne was the first to strike. With the royal emblem sealed on the cover, she set the document down on the table. Within a horrifying collection of inconsistencies, digital timestamps, eyewitness accounts, and internal documents, each of which refuted a statement Meghan had made in public or privately. As Anne moved the file forward, the room fell silent. "These aren't misunderstandings," she stated icily. Meghan responded quickly and angrily. "They're manufactured." She said that the two women had set up a trap and utilized prejudiced records and prepared accusations to put her in a difficult situation. However, her loud and theatrical remarks simply served to emphasize what Anne and Catherine already knew. She wasn't there to accept accountability. Her purpose was to steer the narrative. Catherine refrained from yelling. She remained steadfast. She spoke from a place of pain, looking Meghan in the eye with gentle firmness. She talked on how painful it was to witness her kids being used as pawns in false public narratives. A single, compelling deception has the power to completely alter a family's history. Meghan was reminded by her that the monarchy was more than a symbol. It was a living institution, with actual people, actual kids, and actual repercussions. Meghan, however, refused to give up. She maintained that the documents were taken out of context, that she was being attacked, and that she had been misled, misquoted, and misinterpreted. Her inability to take responsibility simply made things worse. At that point, Anne issued her last warning. Anne stated, "We will act, not to destroy you, but to protect what is still unbroken if you continue to deny." Despite their simplicity, the words carried a great deal of weight. Meghan scoffed, but she remained silent. Rather, her legal counsel, who was seated a short distance away, eventually spoke out. The conversation changed. The tone shifted. It was no longer a royal issue. It was lawful. Attorneys from both sides started discussing the possible repercussions of disclosure, harm to one's reputation, and legal action. What had started out as a discussion was now on the verge of official conflict. Nevertheless, Anne and Catherine maintained their composure throughout. They had not come to get revenge. They had come to be held accountable. And they made it obvious at that precise moment. The palace would hold Meghan accountable if they didn't already. The royal women's decision was finalized by the altercation. However, even the Prime Minister's office was rocked by the subsequent action. The palace triggered a Level 3 Royal Emergency Procedure, an internal crisis categorization meant for challenges to the legitimacy of the monarchy for the first time in decades. Even seasoned insiders were shocked that it was brought on by Meghan's deceit. This was no longer a family issue. There was a constitutional emergency. Something changed as soon as the Highgrove confrontation was over. Instead of feeling relieved, upon their return to London, Anne and Catherine had such a strong sense of urgency that it overrode all conventional protocol. It was evident from their testimony, evidence, and the angry reaction they had recently encountered that this was not a scandal that needed to be hidden. The whole basis of royal credibility was at danger. And such insight necessitated quick action. Rarely discussed and hardly ever used, the emergency protocol is intended for times of institutional or national danger. Threats, war, abdication, and murder. These are its typical triggers, but this time it was intentional, damaging, and quickly eroding popular confidence in the monarchy. Early in the morning, the process was initiated with Anne's signature and Catherine's confirmation, notifying the senior operational units of the Crown while avoiding the Privy Council. The palace was converted into a war room in a matter of hours. Senior royals were called to a midnight meeting behind sealed doors, some of whom had not been called so urgently since the Queen's passing. No leaks, no media. Even employees were prohibited from staying in the room. There was a strained vibe within. Everyone was aware of the consequences. The world was watching as the monarchy faced a crisis of integrity. Palace communications teams were subject to stringent gag orders. Phones were seized, and only secure lines were used in order to prevent instant mayhem, even while rumors erupted in international headlines. There were no official declarations, no leaks to trusted journalists, and no public reactions. However, two voices were not content to remain silent behind the scenes. Truth, according to Anne and Catherine, was the only path ahead. Limited disclosure rather than complete exposure. Enough to show that the monarchy still had a backbone while also restoring faith. They offered a strategy. And both women produced a well-crafted joint statement that acknowledged the existence of false information without identifying specific individuals. Vengeance was not the aim. Preservation was what it was. But King Charles was hesitant. He was aware of the risks. However, he was wary due to the burden of his crown and the memories of previous catastrophes. He was afraid of escalation. He was afraid of legacy. Above all, he was afraid of what would happen if Meghan took revenge. His silence was paralysis rather than weakness. And a storm started to develop in that void. Already furious, William delivered a warning of his own. He would make everything public if the palace did not take action within 48 hours. No delays, no filters. What his father wouldn't do, he would do. It was a time of turmoil, cloaked in control, for the advisors present. Everybody was doing calculations. Every second mattered. Every word and action has the power to change the monarchy's destiny. The palace was aware that time was of the essence. A remark that would alter everything was drafted while everyone was watching. The world held its breath as Anne and Catherine stood side by side in front of the press. This was more than a declaration. It was an implicit caution. The subtext was tremendous, yet their words were measured. The monarchy had been duped, but no longer. The quiet period was finished. The news conference was planned discreetly and without the customary fanfare. There were no elaborate backdrops or palace banners, just two women. One, the emotional heartbeat of the crown, and the other, its iron core, ready to speak with the institutions. Wait behind them. Live streams rolled, and cameras clicked, yet neither of them they weren't there to spread rumors. Their purpose was to mark a boundary in history. With a crisp, unwavering voice, Anne started. She admitted that disparities have come to light in recent months. Disparities in integrity and truth that can no longer be disregarded. Meghan was not mentioned by her. She didn't have to. Each word was carefully chosen to address the core of the problem without turning into a spectacle. Then the sentence that would make headlines all over the world appeared. Personal narrative must never take precedence over royal duty. Everyone could see where the diplomatic dagger was aiming. Then Catherine moved forward, speaking in a soft but no less authoritative tone. Her message was maternal rather than merely institutional. She paused to catch her breath before continuing. As a mother, when damaging deception threatens the next generation, I cannot remain silent. The truth cannot be compromised. Better is what our kids deserve. The Globe sensed the pain and intensity in her remarks. The press blew up in a matter of minutes. The statement was deemed unprecedented by royal commentators. Within an hour, hashtags were trending all around the world on social media. The connotation was obvious, even if neither Anne nor Catherine gave names. Additionally, the royal women had taken charge of the story for the first time in the public eye, not by taking revenge, but by telling the truth, unquestionable, solid, and measured. Meghan's crew worked feverishly behind the scenes. They were unprepared for the timing. A third-party spokesman provided a well-crafted reaction within hours, claiming disappointment and selective narrative, but it had less of an impact than planned. The public noted that the tone was defensive and reactive. Polls changed nearly immediately. After declining in recent years, public opinion abruptly shifted in favor of Anne and Catherine. Their choice to speak without spectacle, their dignity, and their self-control, particularly after so many months of instability. These items struck a chord. The declaration had accomplished more than just upholding the monarchy. It had brought back memories of its former ideals. However, the triumph was far from complete. Because Meghan wasn't done, even if Anne and Catherine had spoken with royal authority. In actuality, she was planning her next move even as the statement reverberated across television panels and news cycles. However, Meghan's next move caught everyone off guard, so the storm had only just started. Meghan replied with a threat of her own, just as the royal family believed they had recovered control. A mysterious letter shared by an unidentified source alluded to a treasure trove of information that might destroy more than just reputations. Meghan was not going to back down. Even though the monarchy had drawn first blood, there was no coincidence in the timing. Just 24 hours after Anne and Catherine's historic declaration rocked the world, an odd leak appeared online. It came from a platform that was well known for its whistleblower content, but it was obviously intentional. No names were mentioned. In the post, it was not need to. Rather, it asserted that a person connected to the royal family had access to unpublished recordings, internal correspondence, and records that, if made public, would permanently damage the monarchy's reputation. The connotation was surgical, but the wording was ambiguous. The public was not the intended audience for this communication. The palace was the direct target of the warning shot. Meghan's legal team released a more official but similarly ambiguous statement almost immediately after, citing defamatory connotations and illegal collaboration inside royal channels. They maintained the right to pursue all required legal options. However, their last statement caught people's attention. Further evidence could be made public if there is further provocation. Someone had lighted the fuse. Social media was ablaze with rumors. Was Meghan getting ready for another interview? LA Oprah? Were there voicemails or video footage? She allegedly secretly recorded important talks at Windsor, according to some. Others thought she had kept text messages from her last days in the UK with palace officials. Theories got out of control. Within hours, hashtags criticizing the palace's lack of transparency and urging Meghan to speak up once more started to trend globally. The atmosphere inside the palace changed from one of victory to one of tension. The quick counterpunch caught King Charles off guard, so he convened another emergency meeting. Advisors discussed what to do next. Hold your ground and decline to participate, or escalate with a legal rebuttal. However, Charles had arrived at his threshold. It was unbearable to think about another public conflict that would involve courtrooms, discovery, and humiliation on a worldwide scale. But Anne didn't change her mind. She allegedly told senior personnel, "Let her. We've spoken the truth. The remainder is just noise." This isn't about controlling fallout, Catherine told her colleagues. In private, echoing the idea, it's about maintaining your composure. The institution received a clear message from their determination. They had had enough of being afraid. However, the monarchy was not gullible. They were aware that the game's regulations had altered. There were repercussions for every message, leak, and whisper. They had to ready themselves this time if Meghan indeed had stuff that may harm the crown deeper than before. Behind the scenes, royal planners started getting ready for another possible media attack without any hesitation. Statements of backup were prepared. We consulted outside PR firms. Additionally, reputational defense backup measures were discreetly initiated. One lesson had been learned by the family from the past. Meghan's year-long retribution wouldn't be subtle. They had reset the chessboard. However, the stakes had never been higher. The struggle for the legitimacy of the crown is still ongoing. It's just getting started. I appreciate you watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next.